All right, I just wanted to thank people for joining, and I am super happy to continue chapter 3 of The Fold. We discussed a little bit last week about the two floors, and I kind of wanted to bring that up again because a lot of the reading from this, especially in the first chapter, I 100% was importing a very classical reading of Leibniz into the text a little bit. And Deleuze is doing something just much different. So I kind of wanted to bring that up. If we all remember the two floors of the Baroque house, there's an upper and a lower floor. The lower floor concerns matter, plastic elastic forces of matter, matter that can be divided infinitely many times. And then at the upper floor, you have the monad. Now, my confusion last week was initially kind of thinking about how in Leibniz, the foundation for all of reality, including matter itself, is the monad. And when Deleuze says the monad is only on the upper floor and not the lower floor, I don't know if anyone else remembers that we were discussing what that looks like and what that means. How come the monad is also not on the lower floor? Why is it only on the upper floor? Deleuze talks about it in relation to souls and clarity when he's talking about the upper floor and the monad. But then he's also talking about a translation between the upper and lower floor too. So it seems like we're almost looking at two aspects of the same process or of reality. So I kind of want that to be in mind as we're approaching this reading of Leibniz, kind of divorced from the typical classical reading and looking at it more so in the sense of perspective, something that is not necessarily foundational to matter itself, or at the very least, not in the way that Leibniz says. So let's see if we get anywhere. I feel like it's still a bit confusing, at least to me, and we can continue. I believe we finished right after discussing Heidegger last week. With that being said, let's do some folding. The fold is undoubtedly Mallarmé's most important notion, and not simply the notion, but rather the operation, the operative act that makes Mallarmé's a great Baroque poet. Hérodiade is already the poem of the fold. The fold of the world is the fan, or the unanimous fold. Sometimes the open fan makes all the particles, grains of matter rise and fall, the ashes and fogs through which we glimpse the visible, as though through the holes in a veil, following the folds that allow us to see the stone and the serration of their inflections, fold upon fold, revealing the city, while at the same time revealing its absence or withdrawal, a conglomeration of dust, hollow collectivities, armies, and hallucinating assemblies. At the limit, it is a characteristic of the sensible side of the fan, of the sensible itself, to stir up the dust through which we see it and which denounces its inanity. Or is that right? I don't know why my first thinking was insanity. At other times, however, on the other side of the now closed fan, the scepter of the rosy shores, the white closed flight that you pose, the fold no longer moves towards pulverization. It exceeds itself or finds its finality in an inclusion, uh, thick layerings offering the tiny tomb surely of the soul. The fold is inseparable from the wind. Ventilated by the fan, the fold is no longer that of the material through which we see, but that of the soul in which we read. Yellow folds of thought. The book or the monad with multiple pages. We see that it contains all folds, since the combinatory of its pages is infinite, but it includes them in its closure, and all its actions are internal. These are not two worlds, however. The fold of the newspaper, dust or mist, inanity, in a fold of circumstance that must have its new mode of correspondence with the book, the fold of the event, the unity that produces being, the multiplicity that produces inclusion, a collectivity become consistent. Okay, so this is kind of an interesting start to this week. The way that I kind of think about it is he is kind of giving a weird summary almost of what we were discussing a little bit there. He's still talking about the fold as some kind of operation here. So this is kind of, to me, echoing. I'm working my way through difference and repetition. It's almost echoing some of difference and repetition, where he's saying that the fold is very much an operation. It's not this image. It's not metaphorical. It is very much a literal operation. And that operation is that of individuation. Now, when he talks a little bit about this, what is he trying to say here with the fan? The fold of the world is the fan. Does that make anyone think of anything? Any kind of fan? So we have a fan maybe in the sense of, modern day, you plug, you plug it into the wall and there's this wind. But I'm also thinking of a fan, given that he's also talking about origami, as a fan that might have creases. I'm thinking of a fan in the sense of something that you unfold, if everyone knows what I'm talking about, and then you wave it on your face, for example. So I'm looking at how he's talking about the fold of the world being the fan itself. But he's also kind of talking here about a fan, and someone else can correct me if I'm wrong, but he's also kind of talking about the fan as this. There's maybe a difference here between an open fan and a closed fan. So when he talks about the open fan, he's talking about particles of matter that rise and fall, the ashes and the fogs. What does that mean? Is that like, does anyone think that he's talking about literal dust there, or is it more so about maybe perception, that when we see the open fan and trying to see, what does he say here? The ashes and fogs through which we glimpse the visible as though through the holes in a veil. So that to me almost sounds a little bit like, it kind of reminds me in a way of, and I know this sounds maybe odd, but like Plato or even Heidegger, when we're talking about inframing, or when we're talking about something as simple as the allegory of the cave. If you have this veil over you, you're maybe not necessarily seeing reality as it is, but maybe like a shadow of reality, or you're seeing it in terms of what Heidegger would call inframing, for example. And I know I don't want to get into like a Plato Heidegger thing here, and that even might be a bad example, but what I do think about is a kind of covering of reality. But notice Deleuze is discussing that there are holes in a veil in a way that we can kind of see through. So we are seeing the real world. And through following the folds, it says it allows us to see the stone and the serration of their inflections, fold upon fold, revealing the city. So a big part for Deleuze here is the same city metaphor over and over and over again, or something very literal, where he says that when we're dealing with perspective, it's an infinite number of perspectives of the same city. So each perspective contains the whole city, but it's only unique for itself. So can anyone, I'm curious if anyone has any ideas about the idea of the veil here, or like why the city appears through folds here, but then take a look, while at the same time revealing its absence or withdrawal, a conglomeration of dust, hollow collectivities. Rudyard writes, the veil is like an egg. No, hang on. Or as I will. This is kind of just like a weird passage. Feels a little odd. He feels like he's throwing a lot here. But it's all very purposeful, as we know, as we're reading Deleuze. Part of me is already starting to think about how when Leibniz is discussing different levels of clarity for the monad, I'm starting to think like, is maybe Deleuze talking about how the folding operation can entail perspectives that are maybe more clear, that allow for more, visibility, while other perspectives maybe aren't as clear? And then Rudd continues by writing, most of Deleuze's metaphors are egg, so it was a fair guess. I'm sure we can definitely relate the egg here. Think about the egg as a folding operation. What's happening within the egg? We see them talking about gradients and thresholds and intensities. But the egg is never finished. It's never hatched. The folding operation is not something transcendent that God beyond itself is doing. The folding operation is itself the individuating process. And I don't know if people saw the theory chat recently here in the Discord, but my question as I was kind of reading through this past week in DNR and other texts is that, well, why this process instead of another process? Why is the individuating process specifically a fold? It could have been something else in theory, no? But then I think Deleuze is sort of answering that by saying, maybe the problem is you're looking at it as a fixed process where it is kind of this thing that I can grasp onto and say, this is different from that. When in reality, the thisness or the thatness of the process is maybe the problem. Maybe the problem is that the operation is not fixed and compared to another operation. Rudyard writes, so last reading, the fold was Heidegger's two-part. Deleuze's two stories of a single house takes a different position where the folding of two things makes the immanent, yet the same house. And yeah, no worries. Feel free to just obviously jump in whenever you want to, leave a comment, whatever you need to do. But Rudyard, I think that you are correct here. I think that the house, we're dealing with two levels of the same thing, same process. And yeah, I think you're exactly on the right track here. It's not that, and that's, I think, the difficult thing that I was having last week, Rudd. Exactly. I think the problem was I kept thinking that, for matter itself, I keep going to that Leibnizian idea of matter itself is concerned with the compound. So the basis for that compound has to be a simple substance. Therefore, the monad is the baseline of reality for all of matter. Whereas I think what Deleuze is saying is it's almost like for that matter to exist, there needs to be the perception of it in a way. And I don't know why it makes me think of like Berkeley's empiricism. Like for something to exist, it needs to be perceived. It kind of feels similar when he's talking about point of view, even though I know he's not doing that. And Rudd also writes, and hello, Reznoza, good to see you. Glad you could make it. Sorry that it's a bit late today. But Rudd writes, here, even with two parts, we even only see the matter incompletely. The two parts folding into one are incompletely revealed. Not only can we not see the two perfect realities of dualism, or that we only have to see the one reality of the monist, instead, we can't even see the multiplicity of the folds converging. Monists may see a physical world and think all can be understood. This is where it's difficult, and I think you're totally right. And this is where I think without parallelism, it's making Deleuze a little bit confusing here. But I totally see what you mean, that when we take this sort of one substance model kind of monists, they're able to say, everything is one, and everything is an expression of the one. And Deleuze's concern there is, of course, trying to ask, if everything's the one, how can we individuate between things? What if the one that we understand is actually just an individuating process? But in that process itself, you have an infinite number of individuations that are always changing and in a state of flux. To have that, he goes to the monad. And the monad itself has this really weird relationship with matter. Um, and then Red also writes, but in reality, no pun intended, matter and physical reality isn't even completely understood. And here, the veil of matter may even conceal potential of more. Interesting. I really like how you're talking about the veil of matter here. It's almost like so it's almost like you're saying that what the perspective sees or the specific point of view might also be a little bit tricky. It might be tricky because of the fact that maybe we're only seeing kind of one side. And it does make me think a lot about how we were discussing Zeno's paradox and the striation of space in their work, and how it's very easy to approach space as that striated kind of from that kind of perspective. But it's a little harder to maybe conceptualize it as smooth. And maybe there is this kind of level that the veil here is playing a kind of trick on us in almost a way. And Rudd also writes, the holes in a veil are little gaps, like space in sheer fabric or fine lace. See, but for me, that those little gaps, that makes it hard. Because that when I view it as a little gap in between points of view, I see like the classic critique that we saw earlier of Leibniz saying that, we don't want to look at monads like little atoms, because if that's the case, then there's a gap between the two. Bread continues by saying, when a bride wears a veil, it plays with light, casting shadows that conceal and also emphasizing features by pushing the shadows. Yeah, good tie there to the bride wearing a veil. Good tie to a veil, because it could also mean something in relation to a union here as well, like a union of the floors. And like you said with the light, I do think that's interesting. The kind of the light and darkness being kind of one in the same process too, right? So that's kind of interesting. Reisnoser writes, I was just reading Hegel, so this discussion of a critique of one-sidedness is burnt into my mind right now. Well, good luck with reading Hegel. I mean, you might have to teach us and tell us if you see Hegel here. I haven't really read a ton of Hegel. I only know Adorno's reading of Hegel, and that's also very limiting. So as we can see here, we're kind of noticing some of the same earlier analysis that Deleuze has of the perspective of the city. We see that each monad has the entirety of the world embedded in its perspective, and it expresses the entire world from its own point of view. But that's not the same as matter, and that it's not necessarily foundational to matter, but in a way it kind of is, because the floors are interrelated. We do notice here that this idea of the fold of the world being a fan, we do notice that he's discussing an openness and closeness to the fan as well. Does anyone have any kind of thoughts on the openness and closeness of the fan? The open fan makes all the particles of matter rise and fall. Understood as a glimpse of the visible as through the holes in a veil. Do we have an idea maybe how the fold, or the fan, is different when it's open and closed? Are we thinking about the fan here in terms of like I said earlier, a fan with a crease that we open and close in that sense? Because it's still a fan even if it's closed. Or maybe I'm thinking of a fan in the wrong way. Maybe Deleuze has just this amazing air conditioning unit. Rudd says, I think the veil is meant to be joined to the fan as a metaphor, so I don't want to make so much of it. True. And that's also my problem with sometimes reading Deleuze. It's just that, am I reading too much in a certain metaphor or what he's playing with, especially because he's just super creative with his writing. So Yeah. Rudd says, the ashes and fog are like the fold. Feel free to jump in there. Imagine, welcome. Good to see you, buddy. We started this a bit late. So we just got through this first paragraph just now, and we were chatting about this, where Deleuze kind of equates the fold to a fan. And I'm still trying we're still trying to figure out maybe what he means when it's open and closed. He does say here, the fold is inseparable from the wind. Now, when I think of the wind here, I think of something that's kind of always constant, but always changing too. So is that process of individuation similar? Because remember, the operation, the fold, to be clear to everyone, that is a process of individuation. So when he says that, is individuating then that process, is that like the wind? Rudd also writes that the wind as it interplays with the dust and the smoke. Looks like Rudd also left. But yeah, kind of interesting here. The wind being an interplay. So that's why the fold is inseparable from the wind. And the fold, that process has those two parts. And maybe Rudd just kind of figured it out. When we're dealing with dust and we're dealing with smoke, they seem different, but are they not also related? So yeah, I'm feeling pretty good with this. Just kind of seeing if there's any other kind of questions I have, and anyone else, if we have questions or anything, please let me know. These are not two worlds. The fold of the newspaper in a fold of circumstance that must have its mode of correspondence with the book. Yeah, really, really fascinating. And, this also seems to me, when Deleuze and Guattari write in A Thousand Plateaus that monism equals pluralism, I wonder if he's sort of getting at that, if that's what Deleuze is getting at here, where you have the monism of the first floor almost, where matter is infinitely continuous and infinitely divisible. But then on the upper floor, you have the points of view. And there's an infinite number of points of view that are completely different from one another. Can you have one without the other? It doesn't seem like it. And I think the biggest problem I'm having is I'm having such a difficult time understanding points of view outside of kind of a consciousness. And I know that's bad. That's not what we're not supposed to start with consciousness. We're not supposed to start here with a subject that is perceiving the world. But for me, it's kind of hard to think through a subject here. It's hard for me to think through what points of view even, look like. I think if we're all good with this, feel free. And of course, we can always go back. So I don't want you to feel like you need to respond. Like, please feel free to talk about the previous paragraph, even if we're a couple paragraphs after. All right. Oh, Rumpel, let's see what you wrote here. Fold of the event, again, takes me immediately to Zupancic's Nietzsche and the Event, Nietzsche as the event, from her book The Shortest Shadow, where Jenseits, I don't know if I'm saying that, from the German is not necessarily a beyond, but an in-betweenness, a middle. Oh, totally, and I if I was able to make the meeting of the second one, we read the Nietzsche bit, and then the second one, I would have loved it. Because that's, that does remind me a little bit of her work when she's talking about that in-betweenness, or what's it called? Noonday or something? Mid-noon? Something like that. Noontide, thank you. Yeah, that totally reminds me of Nietzsche as well. And of course, we know Deleuze is inspired by Nietzsche. All right, let us continue this next paragraph. In Leibniz, it is not the folds of a fan, but the veins of marble. And on one side, there are all those folds of matter through which we see living beings under a microscope, and collectivities through the folds of dust they themselves stir up, armies and flocks, green through the dust of yellow and blue. Inanities are fictions, swarming holes that constantly feed our disquietude, our boredom, or our vertigo. And then, on the other side, there are those folds of the soul, where inflection becomes inclusion, just as Mayarme says that folding becomes compressing. We are no longer seeing, we are reading. Leibniz begins to use the word read both as the act internal to the privileged region of the monad and as the act of God in the entire monad itself. It is well known that the total book was Leibniz's dream as much as it was Mayarme's, even though neither of them would ever stop writing in fragments. Our error is to believe they did not succeed in what they wanted. They perfectly achieved this unique book, the Book of Monads, in their letters and occasional writings, since it could sustain all the dispersion as so many combinations. The monad is the book, or the reading room. However, the visible and the readable, the exterior and the interior, or the facade in the room, are not two worlds, since the visible can be read, like the newspaper in Mayarme, and the readable has its theater, like the theater of reading in both Leibniz and Mayarme. Combinations of the visible and the readable constitute the emblems or allegories that were so dear to the Baroque. We are always led back to a new kind of correspondence or mutual expression, an intra-expression, fold upon fold. All right, does this kind of clarify a little bit to people? Is that just me? Does it clarify a bit about the last kind of paragraph we were dealing with? Because to me, I kind of see parts of it. When he talks about this first part, there are folds of matter. So that's the first floor, the folds of matter. The second, and that's through which we see living beings under a microscope. So organic matter, plastic and elastic forces, infinitely, divisible, whatever. And then the second floor, folds of the soul or the monad. This is the monad, folds of the soul, where inflection becomes inclusion. And if we can figure that part out, I think that makes our life a lot easier, where inflection becomes confusion. Because when we are seeing the inflection point, when the universe is an infinite curve, and we see the inflection, that inflection proves that there is continuity to the curve or the line, while without being a break, and it also means that there is some individual, not necessarily fixed, but there is an individuated thing, always changing or whatever, but it's its own thing. And that's what we notice about singularities or inflections in particular. You have unique points that are perfectly unique. They're not the same as another point, yet it doesn't disrupt the continuity of the line. So when Deleuze is saying inflection becomes inclusion, this is the second floor, the upper floor. We are no longer seeing, we are reading. What does that mean? If we can kind of figure that out, I think that would make it a lot more clear. When we look at this footnote here, when Deleuze is referencing Leibniz discussing how God is in the entire monad itself, he cites the monadology. Quote, every body is sensitive to everything which is happening in the universe, so much so that one who saw everything could read in each body what is happening everywhere, but a soul can read in itself only what is distinctly represented there. Any interesting ideas? Also, I'm just noticing some stuff in the chat. My bad. Yeah, Rumpel wrote veins of marble, Condillac, right? I actually just when you wrote that, I meant to respond. I'm not familiar with Condillac actually, at all. The veins of marble seems interesting. It's kind of making me also think about maybe the Baroque period and statues. So it's almost like there is this almost like this fluidity of matter where it feels or looks like it's almost alive, even if it's, you know, a hardened surface or whatever. And that's what Deleuze is saying, is that matter is not perfectly hard, but it's also not perfectly soft or fluid. It's kind of in this weird, it's always in between, as you kind of, as to use your own words right there. Um, but that also means that perspective is too. Perspective isn't fixed, and that's where Deleuze is trying to challenge, the notion of a fixed subject, a Cartesian subject, the Kantian subject that rationally perceives and acts in the world. That thing comes later. The primary process here is the production of the perspective itself. What is that, right? What is that perspective? Because then it's all like I said, it does make me feel like it's like a Berkeleyan empiricism almost, where I can look at something and know it's there, but then when I look away, I can't be sure that it's there because I'm not perceiving it. It feels like almost like, why does there even need to be kind of that perspective in the first place? I mean, he would probably just respond that that's part of individuation itself, and that question might be an image of thought or representationalist thinking or something. But I'm still a little confused there, but I think he is kind of trying to get there. He's really trying to get there. Does anyone have any other kind of comments here when he's talking about the book? The monad is the book or the reading room. But then what does he say up here? He says, where does he say about the book? Hold on. Yeah, we are no longer seeing, we are reading. And then he also says that the monad is the book. So what does that necessarily entail? Is the monad interpreting constantly the world, or is it, when he says we, what does that mean? We are no longer seeing. Is he talking about the individuated, monad that is different than every other monad? However, the visible and the readable, the exterior and the interior, are not two worlds. So it seems like he's maybe doing two things at once. He's not saying that there's matter is one world and then the monad is another world. Then it also seems like he's talking about how he's talking about reading and being a book. So it means that there's probably two parts here in a way to the monad. It's like it's its own individuated thing, even though I feel weird saying thing because that assumes it's kind of fixed when it's a perspective. But it's its own individuated. And simultaneously, it almost seems like it's almost reflective in a way. And Rumpel talks about Condillac here, the French philosopher. French philosopher, who was a Catholic priest and philosopher who had a fantastic thought experiment about a thinking thing / being encased in marble and having bits of the marble bit by bit removed and being able to begin sensing, leading to it becoming a limited subject as parts of it are cast off into the world of objects and simultaneously begin to sense those objects, namely through sight. In a very literal sense, he made a body without organs. That's very, very interesting. Very interesting. It kind of reminds me a bit, Rumpel. I have this uncle who is, I don't know if I would call him Taoist or if he would call himself Taoist, but he seems to love the Tao, and he always reads it, and he always tells me, like, what is you? If you take Noah and you remove an appendage, is that you still? Keep going and going and going. Where is the subject? He loves like talking random stories about, or these kind of thought experiments or whatever. And it's kind of what we're getting at a little bit here. Like, where is that? Deleuze said himself, you can divide an ant or an insect an infinite number of times and still not reach that, that monad. That thing that has that point of view, or an ant POV. So where is it? How does it relate? what's that kind of, what's its relationship to the body? Yeah, so really good stuff here. Let us continue to the next one, and anyone can also add in whenever they want to. Okay, do it. The Baroque is inseparable from a new regime of light and color. We can first of all consider light and shadows as 1 and 0, as the two floors of the world separated by a thin line of waters, the blessed and the damned. And the footnote there is, on Leibniz's invention of binary arithmetic, on its two characters, 1 and 0, light and shadow, on the analogy with Foy's Chinese figures, see this text. Reference can be made to Christian Fremont's annotated edition. However, these two terms are not opposed to each other, the blessed and the damned. If we place ourselves in the upper floor in a room with neither door nor window, we will see that it is already very dark, in fact, almost decorated in black, the fuscum subnigrum. This is a Baroque innovation. Instead of priming the canvas with a white background of chalk or plaster, Tintoretto and Caravaggio used a dark red-brown background on which they placed the thickest shadows and then painted directly on it by shading off toward the shadows. Footnote there is Gove. Certain text there. Trite de colors. The status of the painting changes. Things emerge from the background plane. Colors spring forth from the common depth that attests to their obscure nature. Figures are defined more by their covering than their contour. Yet this does not take place in opposition to light. On the contrary, it is by virtue of the new regime of light. Leibniz says in The Philosopher's Profession of Faith, quote, it slides as if through a slit into the midst of the shadows, end quote. Should we understand this to mean that it comes from a basement window, from a narrow opening that is angled or folded, through the intermediary of mirrors, the white consisting of a great number of small reflecting mirrors? More rigorously, since monads have no such slits, a luminosity that has been sealed within it is lit in each monad when it is raised to the level of reason, producing a whiteness through all the little internal mirrors. It produces whiteness, but it produces shadow as well. It produces a whiteness, which is coextensive with the clear area of the monad, yet which becomes obscure or shades off toward the dark background, the fuscum, from which things emerge through well-executed shadows and hues in varying degrees of intensity. Something similar takes place in Descartes. It is enough to inverse perspective or to put the luminous in the place of the eye, the opaque in the place of the object, and shadow in the place of projection. And that footnote is some French text here. It's got to be Leibniz, no? I think so. And new essays. Okay. Wolflin identified the lessons of this progressivity of light that grows and diminishes and is transmitted by degrees. It is the relativity of clarity, as such as motion, the inseparability of the clear and the obscure, the effacement of the contour. In short, the opposition to Descartes, who remained a man of the Renaissance from the double point of view of a physics of light and a logic of the idea. The clear ceaselessly plunges into the obscure. I know chiar scuro, clair obscure, fills the monad along a series that can be followed in both directions. At one end is the dark background, and at the other is the sealed-in light. The latter, when it is lit, produces whiteness in the reserved quartiere. But the whiteness is progressively darkened and gives way to the obscure, to a deepening shadow as it spreads out toward the dark background in the whole monad. Outside the series, we have God on one side, who said, "Let there be light," and with him the white mirror. But on the other side, we have the shadows or absolute black, which consists of an infinity of holes that no longer reflect the received rays, an infinitely spongy and cavernous matter that ultimately consists of all these holes. That footnote is black, the dark background. That's fuscum subnigrum. Colors, white and light, are defined in the table of definitions. Does the line of light or the fold between the two floors pass between the shadows and the dark background it extracts from it? At the limit, yes, to the degree that the lower floor is no longer anything but a cave hollowed out by caves, and matter, held under the waters, is almost reduced to nothing. But concrete matter is up above, its holes already filled with an increasingly subtle matter, such that the fold between the two floors is rather the common limit between the two kinds of full folds. Thanks so much, Imagine here. Is that Caravaggio, the painting?
Yeah, so it's like the calling of Saint Matthew, like, the light, like the God, right? Jesus, it's on the right, like he's pointing. Like that hand is like the creation of Adam. If you look at Michelangelo's,
Oh,
it's like the
interesting.
same hand pointing, and the light follows his hand and it shines on Matthew, like pointing to himself. So
Oh,
then,
whoa, hold on.
like
This is cool. I see. I see.
yeah, it's the
Yeah.
contrast between like the light from above and then like the dark background. So yeah,
Yeah, it's really interesting. I love that line there too. It's like there's this kind of like strict dividing line there between the light and the dark. Um, or the shadow. And yeah, and I'm really happy that Deleuze provides us with some of this because it makes it a fun read. But I also don't know if it fully makes it a lot clearer. But I like what he's doing here. So when he's talking about light and shadows as one and zero, of course my mind goes to like code, you know. Does anyone have an idea? It looks like it's definitely about mathematics and how clearly Leibniz, being the kind of co-founder of calculus here, is it's clearly a reference there to these two kind of floors. He says it's separated. So we see that it does appear like there's this almost binary a lot, as we're clearly noticing. The upper and the lower, the blessed and the damned, the one and the zero. Um, what do we think here about Deleuze maybe talking about how the monad is akin to being in a room with no door or window and no slit at all. It's not like you can, it's not like throwing a letter through a door like the mail person, right? Putting a letter into your door. There is none of that. So I think it looks like he's asking, when you're dealing with this perspective, when you're dealing with this point of view, how does it have a relationship to um, how does that have a relationship to matter? Seems like he's kind of asking some of the questions we've been asking a little bit here. He also brings up Tintoretto as well. And I think I think he mentioned Tintoretto last week. I don't know if he's citing a specific piece here, but let me see here. Is he citing a specific piece? Red, brown background. I'm wondering what piece that might be. It could be maybe like this crucifixion piece. Also very like religious focused, it also looks like in a lot of these from what I'm Googling. I just threw one in. It's kind of fascinating. And even in that, picture, you kind of see there's that almost like ascended floor and the lower floor, and it's connected almost by, looks like almost like a ladder there or something. Um, so when we're looking at the relationship between these two floors, he's clearly trying to say that it's not that light is the almost antithesis of of darkness, but he's also drawing a distinction between them. So what is the Baroque innovation here in terms of art? It's that they don't take a typical, white, they don't prime the canvas with a white background and then go on top of that. They're using a dark background, playing with light a little bit. Why might that be kind of necessary for understanding the folding process or operation? Any idea? See, he writes here, the status of the painting changes. So we're not dealing with, and notice too, he's kind of, not only is he inverting a lot of previous philosophy, but he's also um, he's also kind of showing like historical epochs almost, or he's showing a different era that things are changing artistically. One of these things being the process of painting itself. In this process, things emerge from the background plane. Colors spring forth from the common depth. Figures are defined by their covering, then their contour. So when we take a look at those pieces that are kind of painting here, or at least I don't know about the second one if that's what Deleuze is referring to, but the one that Imagine just posted, we kind of see that here. We see that the color here is what they're playing with, or the relationship between light and dark, emerging from a depth. Is he trying to argue that this is matter or the monad? Just the process of the fold? The operation of individuation? So when they're starting with the white background, um, and I forget if I've told this, I for sure I've told this to someone or someone's told it to me, and I'm sure I've probably seen it online or something. But the relationship between philosophy and a canvas. Some people say that, the world is a canvas and you paint on the world throughout your life, whatever that you is. Yet simultaneously, you are a canvas too that the world paints itself upon as well. So the canvas that you are is a reflection of the whole world, but simultaneously, the world is a reflection of of that individual canvas too. So it's making me think, rather than starting with kind of this white background, like this pure soul, like this Cartesian subject that we, go about and try and remain pure. It's almost like something's constantly like emerging through this process. And that thing that's emerging, he literally says things here. That thing that's emerging is not opposed to light. That monad is not opposed to the light. It is by virtue of the new regime of light. So it's kind of an interesting relationship there. How can you truly, say that that individual canvas that's painted on the entire world is just not all of the world? Well, it is, right? It's not opposed to matter, but it is a perspective or point of view that is its own unique thing, but at the same time a reflection of the entire world. Now, what does that look like? Why does that exist? Why is that necessary? I wonder if Deleuze will get there. Let's keep going down a little bit. I don't know if anyone has any other comments here. Like, this is just such a long paragraph. Maybe I'll go down here a little bit. Maybe let's chat a little bit about the opposition to Descartes here. He says, in short, the opposition to Descartes, who remained a man of the Renaissance from the double point of view of a physics of light and the logic of the idea. So he's clearly showing that maybe the Renaissance era, the era that many people are very fascinated with and by, maybe is that era different than the Baroque. Maybe that era is about just a different view of what he says here, physics of light. So he's saying that how they viewed light itself maybe was also kind of its own interesting thing. It kind of reminds me of Foucault when he's writing about heterotopias, where he's talking about space. And the previous view of space was that, oh gosh, I haven't read this in so long, so sorry, but the previous view of space was essentially we're at the center of the universe. And then all of that changed. All of that changed with what Galileo, correct? I always forget the relationship. Hold on. Let me look really fast. I don't want to say something ridiculous. Yeah, so Copernicus, but what would I swore he talked about Galileo there too, because they're both dealing with astronomy. Whatever it may be, whatever it may be, that view of space starts with this kind of idea that Earth needs to be at the center of everything, and that view of space is something where it's very much prioritizing a fixed location, something that is central to our own subjects, right? Our own subjectivity or that view. But then there was that revolution that where we realized, like, well, maybe it's truly not. We're not at the center. What if something else is? Now, when we're looking here at the quote unquote double point of view of a physics of light, I am a little curious as how that changed. It's making me think. So he says something similar takes place. It is enough to inverse perspective or to put the luminous in the place of the eye, the opaque in the place of the object, and shadow in the place of projection. Wolflin identified the lessons of this progressivity of light that grows and diminishes. It is a relativity of clarity, the inseparability of the clear, which is opposite to Descartes. So it looks like something is happening here, and it just reminds me of how Foucault talks about space. But something's also changing with how we're looking at light. Maybe light is not this, that which uncovers as much as it is that which contours. Where does Deleuze say that? Or maybe the other way around. Figures are defined more by their covering than their contour. Again, I'm not really sure what's happening at the time with light, but it does seem interesting. We also see when Descartes talking about the logic of the idea, we like to think about like a light bulb on our head going off, right? Like, oh, I have this idea. Or when we think about purity, we think about light. When you're, light at the end of the tunnel when we're dealing with death. So maybe Deleuze is trying to invert this kind of view of light as being this kind of pure thing that fully is uncovering some already existing being, rather than something that's always in a state of change. And imagine. I'm not sure, but what is this piece? This looks cool.
So, give me a second. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries at all. No worries.
So that's like the Birth of Venus. I think it's probably the most famous Renaissance painting, other than some things in the Sistine Chapel. So I think in terms of like usage of light, maybe in art, like Renaissance distribution of light is like pretty even. You see like the whole painting is pretty illuminated. There's not this like fierce contrast. If you look at other Renaissance paintings, kind of the same thing. So I think this also means we talks about like, I guess, contours and then like covering things. So it's because there's contrast that like certain people pop out of the image. Like if you look at the not Birth Venus, the Calling of Saint Matthew, like there's this contrast, right? So you have these like figures leaping out of the page. Venus kind of is just like, this is more like flat, right? Like the light more evenly distributed, and there's like this geometry to it. So then it feels like everything's more structure. It's more like ideal. Like the Baroque is kind of trying to disrupt that idealism with more emotion, more like, I guess, fluidity.
Wow, yeah, totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm loving the fact that you put that there, because this is just giving me a lot of like a lot of other ideas too. Like the idea here is that there's almost like this exposure when you're talking about this piece here. There's this Birth of Venus, there's this exposure. The light is it's trying to maybe show something that's hidden almost. Whereas with the other pieces, it's kind of being illuminated, like you said, through darkness, or that relationship between light and darkness, right? So it's not just that the light is there to uncover, is that that process of uncovering is also through that relationship. Yeah, really, really great point there, and I totally would not have caught that if you didn't say anything. And also, right, just throwing that out there one more time, we're dealing with that, with light itself, with Descartes, but it looks like it's also a physics too. So it looks like something's also happening scientifically, I wonder, with how they're viewing light. not just necessarily religiously, spiritually, philosophically. I wonder, like, that scientific kind of idea. Um, let's see here. Some of this is still reminding me a little bit about the kind of camera obscura. I'm thinking about that a little bit, but even then, the camera obscura has an opening into it, whereas Deleuze is trying to show, like, there is no kind of outside here that enters or vice versa when we're dealing with the monad. Okay, let's see. Any other kind of questions, comments, concerns here? I am looking at this about God. When Deleuze is talking about God, I'm a bit confused, honestly, with his relationship to God here, because he's clearly replacing the transcendent God with something more immanent. But he's also showing here, like, we have God who said, "Let there be light," but on the other side, we have the shadows are absolute black. So it's kind of interesting. He's playing a little bit with Christianity too by saying, "Let there be light," and there was light, and then that's kind of the start of it all. But what about the darkness too? Where is that? Where is that in Genesis, maybe, or in the opening of Genesis, I should say? And I know, Rumpel, I think you were the one that said we should do a reading of the Bible. It would be so fun. I'm currently working my way through Numbers right now. I think it's good to be, educated about other, things that, a lot of people are influenced by, So, yeah. Here, give me 1 second. Let me close the door. But we can go on to the next paragraph. All right, let's do it. Germany's entry onto the philosophical scene brought with it the entire German soul, which, according to Nietzsche, revealed itself to be not so much profound as full of folds and creases, citing Nietzsche beyond good and evil. Can we make a portrait of Leibniz's person without including the extreme tension between an open facade and a closed interior, each independent of the other, yet both regulated by a strange pre-established correspondence? It is an almost schizophrenic tension. Nietzsche depicts Leibniz in terms of Baroque traits. As a type of German, Leibniz is more interesting than Kant. Easygoing, full of noble words, crafty, supple, malleable, a mediator between Christianity and mechanistic philosophy, having apart from his own person an enormous audacity, sheltered under a mask and courteously intrusive, modest in appearance. Leibniz is dangerous, a good German who needs facades and philosophies of facades, but is rash and in himself mysterious in the extreme. And that is cited by Ernst Bertram in Nietzsche. The courtly wig is a facade. Oh, nice. This is sick, because I always comment about Leibniz's hair. The courtly wig is a facade, an entryway, as is the vow to hurt no established feelings, as is the art of presenting his system from various points of view, or in a particular mirror, depending on the presumed intelligence of a correspondent or an opponent knocking at his door. All the while, the system itself is up above, turning around itself, losing absolutely nothing to the compromises taking place down below, which Leibniz keeps secret, taking, on the contrary, the best of all sides in order to go deeper into, or make one more fold in, the room with closed doors and sealed windows, the room in which Leibniz has confined himself in saying everything is always the same thing in varying degrees of perfection. Well, this was cool. I love this. Kind of citation of Nietzsche here. And Rumpel, am I missing a citation? I might be. Did I miss one? Or are you? Oh,
No,
are
I'm
you
just
just?
chucking something in on top of BGE.
Yeah, no. Feel free. What is it?
The mirror of representation wording in Nietzsche comes directly from Leibniz, and the earliest treatment, as far as I know, in his corpus is, other than potentially in essays, is in gay science, preceding BGE. Just adding on top of the BGE
No,
workings.
that's wonderful. To be completely honest, I mean, I wasn't even familiar with Nietzsche's relationship to Leibniz at all. Honestly, I'm not the biggest Nietzsche reader. I have read bits and pieces of Twilight of the Idols, bits and pieces of the gay science, bits and pieces of the Beyond Good and Evil. Like, you know, I mean, clearly Nietzsche is a brilliant, philosopher. I just wasn't familiar with his relationship to Leibniz. Are we thinking here that Deleuze is kind of agreeing with Nietzsche's depiction of Leibniz? Do we think that Nietzsche is kind of fond of Leibniz? Because at first it sounds like he's kind of praising the guy, but then it also feels like a little bit like, hold on, he's a bit sheltered, he's dangerous, he needs facades, he's rash. So what do we think of that bit there? I know Imagine and Rumpel, I think you're both a lot more Nietzschean than me. In the meantime, I'm going to post a picture of Leibniz.
If I were to posit an answer, it would probably be in terms of preference that Nietzsche would have. In terms of admiration, it would be Spinoza, Leibniz, then Kant.
Oh, really? Really? Interesting. I just didn't know Leibniz was that far. Like, I can't believe this. I feel like I totally need to read more of Nietzsche on Leibniz. This is really fascinating to me, honestly. Gosh, really interesting too. Deleuze also calls it an almost schizophrenic tension. He does talk about, schizophrenia a lot. Let's see here. Yeah, and then Martin says, yeah, Nietzsche doesn't really like Kant. Well, Nietzsche just kind of goes on a spree of eviscerating everyone. I just didn't realize, like, Leibniz, I just didn't know, I'm not familiar exactly with his full-on relationship. Well, clearly, too, right? What I'm thinking Deleuze is doing here, and anyone can feel free to pitch in, too. I think that, remember, Deleuze is taking so much from Leibniz, so much. But at the same time, he's also seeing that Leibniz has to kind of hide a little bit. He has to hide behind God to pre-establish harmony. He has to kind of hide. That's the main kind of thing for me that I'm reading, right? He has to hide behind something, whereas maybe the idea is already there. So I'm wondering if that sort of reference to Nietzsche here, or Nietzsche's reading of Leibniz, it's like, Nietzsche's saying, yeah, like, Leibniz is definitely more interesting than Kant. He's cool and whatnot. But, he also maybe has this facade for himself where it's maybe he's presenting himself as, he needs to present a lot to justify himself, or he's also needing to hide behind something. Does it read almost as imposter syndrome or something? I'm not fully sure. I do love how he talks about the courtly wig is a facade, an entryway. Kind of interesting. It's almost like he's dressing up. And oddly enough, I wonder if Deleuze is saying, like, look how close he was. Like, there's folds in his hair here, right? Like, he's having to dress himself up, but maybe he's hiding behind something. Because Deleuze is still obviously very critical of Leibniz in certain respects. So, really fun little divergence here or whatever. He's kind of just talking about Nietzsche and their relationship. But I kind of want to keep going. I do think that this here isn't giving us, like, maybe the most in terms of, like, the theoretical meat of it all, but it's still very, very interesting. The best inventors of the Baroque, as well as the best commentators, have had doubts about the consistency of the notion, dismayed by the arbitrary extension it risked taking on, despite their efforts. The Baroque was then restricted to a single genre, architecture, or to an increasingly restrictive determination of periods and places, or even a radical denial. Baroque never existed. It would be strange, however, to deny the existence of the Baroque in the way we deny unicorns or pink elephants, for in these latter cases, the concept is given. Whereas in the case of the Baroque, it is a question of knowing if we can invent a concept that is capable, or not, of making it exist. Irregular pearls exist, but the Baroque has no reason to exist without a concept that forms that very reason. It is easy to make the Baroque non-existent. It is enough not to propose a concept of it. It is one and the same thing to ask if Leibniz is the Baroque philosopher par excellence, or if he forms a concept capable of making the Baroque exist in itself. In this regard, those who have sought to link Leibniz to the Baroque have often done so in the name of an overly broad concept, such as next coincidence of opposites. Christine Buchy-Glucksmann proposes a much more interesting criterion, a dialectic between seeing and gazing. But this criterion, in turn, may be too restrictive and will only allow us to define an optical fold. That's citing Herbert Knecht and Christine Buchy-Glucksmann. And on that author, Deleuze says the author develops a conception of the Baroque that appeals to Lacan and Merleau-Ponty. Interesting. I'm actually going to highlight that.
This is literally back to the Condillac thing. This is the point that Zupancic is making, is that there's a difference between seeing and seeing as the subject and sort of,
right?
Like the subjectification aspect of seeing versus sort of just the net of light casting itself over a series of objects, and the differentiation, the subjectification of being a subject as different from objects. Like the whole Condillac thing is fantastic as a thought experiment.
I need to check this out. Seriously, please ping me with the where Zupancic talks about it, because it's interesting too that Deleuze is actually referencing Lacan here. And it's almost like he's showing that this concept of the Baroque, if read in a different way, might even go to the level of psychoanalysis. So I'm wondering here if the kind of treatment that Deleuze is kind of doing with Lacan and Anti-Oedipus, where they are very they have a lot of admiration for Lacan. They draw upon him. They take his ideas and run with them while also criticizing him. Are they kind of showing that Leibniz is like that Lacan, where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of good meat here, but specifically the relationship between seeing and gazing and the kind of two floors. But can we radicalize it and read it in a different way? Really great. I want to read more of that. Let us continue. For us, however, the criterion or operative concept of the Baroque is the fold, in its full comprehension and extension, fold upon fold. If the Baroque can be extended outside precise historical limits, it seems to us that it is always by virtue of this criterion, through which we recognize Michaud when he writes living in the folds, or Boulez when he looks to Mallarmé and composes pli selon pli, or Hantai when he turns folding into a method. When he turns folding into a method, and that is C. Henry Michaud, Life in the Folds. And then the footnotes for that is just from all the things that you just mentioned, so probably don't need to read it. And if we turn to the past, by contrast, what reasons might we have to already find the Baroque, for instance, in Uccello? It is because he was not content to paint blue and pink horses and to draw lances as strokes of light toward all points in the sky. Rather, he ceaselessly drew mazzocchi, which are circles of wood covered with cloth and placed on the head, such that the folds of fabric, when pulled back, surround the entire face. But he ran up against the incomprehension of his contemporaries. The power to develop absolutely all things and the strange series of hats with folds seemed to him to be more revealing than the magnificent marble figures of the great Donatello. And that footnote is Marcel Schwab, Vies Imaginaries. There would be thus a Baroque line that would move exactly in accordance with the fold, and that would bring together architects, painters, musicians, poets, and philosophers. Of course, one might object in turn that the concept of the fold is itself overly broad, even if we limit ourselves to the plastic arts. What period and what style would fail to recognize the fold as a characteristic of its painting or sculpture? It exists not only in clothing, but in the body, rocks, waters, the earth, the line. Baltrusitis, sorry for mispronouncing all of this. Baltrusitis defines the fold in general by scission, but a scission in which each of the two divided terms stimulates each other. In this sense, he defines the Romanesque fold by the scission simulation of the figurative and of geometry. And he cites Georgis Balstrucitis there. Gosh, I kind of lost my place. Let me see here. Yep, 78. Okay. Similarly, could not the oriental fold be defined by the empty and the full? And other types of folds would have to be defined in turn through a comparative analysis. Uccello's folds are not really Baroque because they are trapped in polygonal, inflexible, and solid geometrical structures, no matter how ambiguous they may be. If we want to maintain the operative identity of the Baroque in the fold, we must show that the fold remains limited in other cases, whereas in the Baroque it enjoys an unlimited freedom, whose conditions are determinable. The folds seem to give up their supports, cloth, granite, or cloud, in order to enter into an infinite contest, as in El Greco's The Agony in the Garden, the one in the Toledo Museum. Or again, notably, in the Baptism of Christ, the counterfold of the calf and the knee, where there seems to be an inversion of the calf, confers on the leg an infinite undulation, while the pinching of the cloud in the middle transforms it into a double fan. These are the very traits, taken in all their rigor, that must account for the extreme specificity of the Baroque, and the possibility of extending it outside its historical limits without any arbitrary extension. The contribution of the Baroque to art in general, and the contribution of Leibnizism to philosophy. All right, so we have some cool photos to look at. Let me go up. Let's take a look, see if we are inspired. This one is figure 8. Simon Hontai, Marielle 1, it looks like. Looks like almost like a rug. I'm zooming in, it looks kind of like that. All right, it looks good. Good to me. Figure 8, Paolo Uccello, The Battle of San Romano. Dang, this is really interesting. I like it. I feel like I wish I studied art a lot more, and just I don't know. I've been to so many museums that it just feels like I never save it. I recently started saving some photos into an album to be trying to learn and go back. And then here's figure 9. Figure 9. It's also Paolo Uccello, perspective study of Masaccio. It looks kind of interesting. It reminds me of the Panopticon or something. So you have that there. And this is Paolo Uccello again. It's called the Deluge, the Detail. It kind of looks like someone's looking, but it's kind of weird. It's this little halo hat thing that they're wearing. It's black, white, checkered, so maybe playing with light a little bit there. And then figure 11, Paolo Uccello again, the route of San Romano. Oh, it looks like this is detail. Hold on. Did we? Oh, it said detail, meaning that they just zoomed in a part of it. I was like, okay, that's kind of an interesting piece. So clearly we're looking at that hat thing there. Yeah, really interesting. I wonder if we look at it again. Yeah, here we go. So it looks like, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, maybe what Deleuze is trying to get at here is kind of maybe an objection to this work, where someone might argue that, your use of the Baroque is just merely decorative. Your use of the Baroque is maybe anachronistic, if I'm using that right, and how, you can't really tie this to every time period. You kind of are maybe cherry picking. But it looks like he's trying to argue that the Baroque as an operation, who cares a ton about the historical moment, the exact year to year the Baroque was around. We can kind of see it in other painters and other places. I mean, that's kind of how I'm reading this here. I could totally be wrong though. So please, in terms of that little hat that we just saw, he ceaselessly drew mazzocchi, which are circles of wood covered with cloth and placed on the head, such that the folds of fabric, when pulled back, surround the entire face. So yeah, I kind of do read this a little bit as just Deleuze doing what Deleuze does here with really referring to a lot of different art and kind of showing that you can see the fold here in these pieces. Let's take a look at the other pieces he refers to really quick. Figure 12, El Greco, the agony in the garden. Looks like something's in, what is it? This almost looks like a rock. It looks like something's inside. You can kind of see the light peering in. So this on the right, what is that? Is that just the moon maybe? The moon and the sun or something? Here, where does figure 12? Really quick, let's check that out. Here it is. The folds seem to give up their supports, cloth, granite, or cloud, in order to enter into an infinite contest. The folds give up their supports. So maybe it almost looks like more open. Maybe it's like you see the folding maybe of the clothes a little bit, but then you kind of also see, I don't know, maybe it looks a little bit smoother than some other pieces we just looked at, or a little bit more clean almost. And then we can look at figure 13, El Greco, baptism of Christ. And this one's interesting because you have that kind of two floors again, right? You have the two floors again at the top. You have the kind of the true kind of point of view of it all. And there's also a lot of bodies kind of in the top there, like a lot. And then at the bottom, you kind of have what is this? Jesus kind of undergoing something here, a baptism. You see kind of maybe like atonement or at the level of matter. You know, I mean, in Christianity, we see that the world is broken. That this is almost like a test to see if we are good or bad, and that there's something wrong in a way with the body. When you die, you don't take your body with you. You know, your soul goes to God. So at the bottom, there's almost like this level of agony in a way, or atonement, or trying to, you know, to make sense of matter almost. While at the top, you have this kind of like perfect, all-seeing point of view. So yeah, really interesting. So I wonder if there's part of that is also the idea of clarity, the idea that God is, you know, has his perfect point of view. But what if that point of view is an infinite number of monads, actually? So let's continue. We have these different levels now. It looks like there's steps. Maybe it looks like he's giving a nice little summary of this. Number 1, the fold. The Baroque invents the infinite work or operation of the fold. The problem is not how to finish a fold, but how to continue it, how to make it pass through the ceiling, how to carry it to infinity. This is because the fold not only affects all kinds of materials, which thereby become matters of expression depending on their scale, speeds, and different vectors, mountains and waters, papers, fabrics, living tissues, the brain. It also determines and reveals the form, notice the capital F there, which makes it a form of expression, a gestalton, the genetic element or infinite line of inflection, the curve with unique variable. And I think for all of us who have kind of followed so far, we have an idea here that yes, the Baroque is not, like we said earlier, decorative. It is an actual operation. It is never finished in the sense that it is complete. There is not a transcendent individual doing the fold. It's a constant process of individuation that is carried to infinity. And as we see here, it's carried along different speeds and scales, and it effectuates matter in various ways. Mountains, waters, papers, fabrics, living tissues, the brain, tables, discord, computers. 2, and also anyone can just feel free to jump in as well anytime. 2, the interior and the exterior. The infinite fold separates or passes between matter and the soul, the facade and the closed room, the exterior and the interior, because the line of inflection is a virtuality that is ceaselessly differentiating itself. It is actualized in the soul, but realized in matter, each on its own side. Such is the characteristic of the Baroque, an exterior always on the exterior, an interior always on the interior, an infinite receptivity and an infinite spontaneity, the exterior facade of perception and the interior rooms of action. The architecture of the Baroque, up to our own time, will never cease to confront two principles, a weight-bearing principle and a coding or covering principle. It's still going, I think. Yes, sometimes Gropius and sometimes Deleuze. That's Bernard Cash, or the Earth Moves, the Furnishing of the Territories. The conciliation of the two will never be direct, but it is necessarily harmonic, inspiring a new harmony. It is the same expression, the line, that is expressed in the elevation of the inner song of the soul by memory or by heart, and in the extrinsic fabrication of the material of the musical score from cause to cause. But precisely what is expressed does not exist outside its expressions. So at the first point here, he's kind of giving a summary. The first point is the fold. It is an operation. The second is the level of the interior and exterior. How the fold passes between matter and soul. It's almost like that translation between the two and how they both are part of this process. They aren't separated from each other and there's a gap between them, but rather, as matter is taking its form, as the point of view is being produced, that folding operation is what brings those two kind of things together, and they've never been apart. So that's kind of how I'm reading this here. And that doesn't mean that they bring them together in the sense that everything is now one, in the sense that matter now enters the monad or the monad affects matter. It is just instead that they are interdependent, I guess maybe would be the best way to kind of put it. And yeah, it's kind of weird. Deleuze does say it is necessarily harmonic, but then he doesn't explain how. What is the thing doing the harmonizing? Now, for Leibniz, he had a god for this process. Though Leibniz's process looked a little bit different, Leibniz did have God, which allowed him to say, yep, all these monads are in harmony now. For Deleuze, it's kind of weird because he doesn't have that. He doesn't establish it. Now, I've thought through a few things. The first thing is, you could ask Deleuze, well, what's the foundation for that harmony? And he says, well, it's the fold. The fold, the individuating process. And then you could say, well, what's the foundation for that? Now, this is, where something has to give. Deleuze would say, well, maybe you're asking the question wrong. It's like asking why is there something rather than nothing. It's just maybe Deleuze is saying, and being a little necessitarian here, saying that, yeah, maybe nothing could exist other than this process. Like, this is the foundation. This is reality, and reality is a process, and it couldn't have been any other way, right? That's the necessitarian element. And Imagine said it's a thing in itself. Thank you, Kant. No. So you can ask Deleuze that, but he can maybe win, of course, that necessitarian point. But then I don't know if people also saw the chat. That's where I was trying to get. Okay, well, fine. Let's say that the fold is necessary. Its existence, its essence is its existence in kind of a Spinozist necessitarian way too, almost. There's no other deeper reality to it. There's no genesis of Genesis. There's no individuation process that created the individuation process that is the fold. You can ask why, but Deleuze will say there doesn't need to be a deeper reason. Now, whether you buy that, whether you think it's a good argument, it's totally up to how we're reading this and how we interpret this and how we approach it. Does it also maybe then mean that matter is kind of determinist in a way, right? If the fold itself is doing that harmony, then it makes me think, okay, that is there room for chance, or is there room for true novelty in a way? And I think that's a good question to ask. I don't want to keep bringing up Badiou because I know I brought it up a bit, but I was reading through his book again, and I'm just not super convinced by some of the stuff he's saying about Deleuze having this kind of hidden one. I think Deleuze is kind of problematizing the idea that there is this huge sheet of paper there to begin with, rather than just a continuous folding process, at least for this book. Rumpel writes, Zupancic here makes an argument that you get perhaps something akin to harmony only through a Nietzschean double affirmation of the event, the fold, the in-between, the middle. Yeah, I mean, I think that you're totally onto something, and I think Deleuze wouldn't be in disagreement here at all. I think that Deleuze would definitely say that maybe harmony itself is constantly being produced through that operation, through that kind of double affirmation. By always being in the middle, it has to be harmonious because it's never fixed or something like that. Again, what does that mean truly? If I really think about it, I'm not sure. I am not sure. I'm going to keep reading just because we are almost done. And again, I'm really sorry for being late to this meeting, but we're almost done. So I'm going to keep reading and I will continue reading the comments. 3. The high and the low. The perfect accord of decision or the resolution of the tension is achieved through the distribution of two floors. The two floors being the floors of one and the same world, the line of the universe. The facade matter moves downward while the soul room rises. The infinite fold thus passes between the two floors. But in thus differentiating itself, it swarms on both sides. The fold differentiates itself into folds, which insinuate themselves in the interior and overflow into the exterior, thereby articulating themselves as the high and the low. The folds of matter under the condition of exteriority, and the folds in the soul under the condition of closure. The folds of the score and the folds of the song. The Baroque is the abstract art par excellence. On the lower floor, flush with the ground, close at hand, it comprehends the textures of matter. The great modern Baroque painters, from Paul Klee to Vauthier to Dubuffet, Betancourt. But abstraction is not the negation of form. It posits the form as folded, existing only as a mental landscape in the soul or the head up above. Hence, it also comprehends the immaterial folds. The various matters constitute the depth, but the folded forms are manners. One goes from matters to manners, from soils and terrains to habitats and salons, from the texturology to the logology. These are the two orders, Dubuffet's two floors, with the discovery of their harmony, which must be pushed to the point of their indiscernibility. Is it a texture, or a fold of the soul, or of thought? Matter that reveals its texture because of material, just as the form that reveals its folds becomes force. This is the material-force couple, which, in the Baroque, replaces matter and form, the primitive forces being those of the soul. And then here they cite on the two orders, the material and the immaterial. See Jean Dubuffet. All right. The high and the low, to me, is kind of one of the more interesting elements also here. And the reason why is because it almost seems like there's kind of more of a separation than before between the two floors. But I don't think that's what Deleuze is necessarily getting at. I think he's saying that the fact of the matter that there is a folding operation between the two floors means, in a way, that the top floor kind of pushes upward and the bottom floor pushes downward. But he also does seem to be talking a lot about matter here. I'm curious if anyone has any ideas about how maybe the high and low is different than the interior and the exterior, because they kind of sound similar, just kind of from reading that. The high and the low sound a bit similar. While people are thinking about that, Rumpel writes, and this double affirmation is grossly missing in the Western tradition, at least prior to Nietzsche. I mean, I don't hear about it much. I'm going to totally take your word for it. And that double affirmation too, it's almost like it's being affirmed on the two floors simultaneously, right? So there's like this like doubling, and I think Deleuze says that there's always a double. Or even when he talks about the idea of Genesis here, he says that it's the caterpillar and the butterfly. Is one different than the other? Are they two different beings? The species or the animal is always double. Remember, he said that, I believe, in the first chapter. But with this high and the low, I mean, for me, I am a little bit kind of like hesitant to say it's super different from interior and exterior. And it looks like he's citing and putting a lot on Jean Dubuffet here. But he does say, maybe at the end, I think that's where we can probably look and see, like, okay, maybe he's getting somewhere that we can understand. He says, matter that reveals its texture because a material. See, I think that must be becomes a material. It must be like a typo. Becomes a material, just as the form that reveals its folds becomes force. So, interestingly enough, look at that. Matter that reveals its texture becomes a material. Form that reveals folds becomes force. Form that reveals its folds becomes force. It's kind of fascinating that this folding operation is it almost seems like it almost seems like there is novelty. See, it seems like Deleuze would respond like, no, what's happening is this folding process is taking this thing called matter, and through the process of folding and unfolding and refolding and whatnot, you see different textures arise, you see different forces come into play, so on and so forth. And then he says this is the material force couple, which in the Baroque replaces matter and form. So it's now not that matter and form, in the sense of like Aristotle's hylomorphism, exists, where matter's there, and then you have this kind of form that's separate, and then matter can kind of fit into a mold. Instead, here, the material force, as matter is continuously revealing its texture, and as the form itself is continuously revealing the folds, if it's always continuously happening, then you don't have this matter almost that exists independently of everything, or a form that exists independently of everything. It's a material force. I actually really do like that. How does that relate then to high and the low? How does this part? So I understand maybe the low. I can kind of see how matters in form are different than how we can usually conceptualize them. But it does seem like the upper floor, the high here, there's still a relationship between point of view. So if we kind of maybe take that same logic, matter and form becomes a material force couple, how could we view maybe like point of view? How could we view point of view? So we're kind of changing from a very strict, maybe Leibnizian monad that almost looks like an atom. And we're taking that and trying to change that into a perspective instead. So maybe that's kind of the relationship between high and low. Maybe it's trying to make it just a little bit more fluid than people might normally read it. Okay. And yeah, if anyone has anything to say, feel free. Patina, you've been quiet lately, which is okay. I don't want to pressure anyone to say anything, but feel free to say whatever you need, whatever you want to say. Okay, 4, the unfold. This is certainly not the contrary of the fold, nor its effacement, but the continuation or extension of its act, the condition of its manifestation. When the fold ceases to be represented in order to become method, an operation or act, the unfold becomes the result of the act that is expressed precisely in this fashion. Hantai begins by representing the fold, tubular and swarming, but soon he folds the canvas or paper. Then there are, as it were, 2 poles, the pole of studies and the pole of tables. Sometimes the surface is locally or irregularly folded, and the external sides of the open fold are painted so that the stretching, spreading, and unfolding cause the fields of color and the zones of white to alternate, each modulating the other. Sometimes it is the solid that projects its internal faces onto a regularly folded flat surface, following its creases. In this case, the fold has a fulcrum. It is knotted, enclosed at each intersection, and unfolds so as to make the white interior circulate. And that citation is on Hantai and his method of folding. See Marcelin Plainet, Arca Marseille Catalog, and also Dominic Fourcade, Pompidou Center Catalog, Ives Michaud, Venice Catalog, Genevieve Bonifay, Hantai. Wow, you know what? Okay, I feel like this is like definitely a moment where we should probably just really quickly look at what this work is. Okay, well, don't look up his name. It's not appropriate. Okay, I literally typed in images because when you type in his name, this painter's name, it just shows up with his like his face here and like an article. So you figure that if that's his face and you click on images, that's not what showed up. Okay, let's see this. here, this person seems interesting. Take a look. See here. I'll post a couple. It seems like Deleuze is just kind of spending all the time on this person. I feel like there's just a lot of jokes probably to make about that, but we're not going to get into that. So let's see here. Let's continue. Where did I end off here? Because I read the footnote on 81. Sometimes the color is made to vibrate in the folds of matter. Sometimes the light is made to vibrate in the folds of an immaterial surface. Nonetheless, why is the Baroque line only a possibility for Hantai? It is because he never ceases to confront another possibility, which is the line of the Orient. The painted and the not-painted are not distributed like a form and a background, but rather like the full and the void in a reciprocal becoming. It is in this manner that Hantai leaves the eye of the fold empty and only paints the sides, the line of the Orient, but sometimes he makes successive foldings in the same region, which no longer allows any voids to subsist, the full Baroque line. Perhaps it is a profound characteristic of the Baroque to set itself in confrontation with the Orient. This was already Leibniz's adventure with his binary arithmetic. In 1 and 0, Leibniz recognized the full and the void in the Chinese manner. But the Baroque, Leibniz did not believe in the void, which seemed to him always to be filled with a folded matter, so that the binary arithmetic superimposes the folds that the decimal system and nature itself hide in apparent voids. For Leibniz and in the Baroque, folds are always full. In that citation, is Leibniz counted on his binary arithmetic for the discovery of a periodicity in numerical series. Nature would perhaps have this periodicity in its foldings as in the instance of first numbers. Okay, this point here really quickly about the void is really fascinating because it's answering Badiou's critique really well. Essentially, Badiou's argument, to be simple, is that totally looks like a rhizome, and or at least how D&G would talk about it. And I agree, Patina. It looks really, really nice. It looks very clean. I think, like when I go to museums, like I want to see some cool stuff like this, honestly. Because sometimes I go and I'm a little underwhelmed. But some museums are actually really, really amazing. Okay, regardless, when we're looking at the idea of Badiou, his argument is that Deleuze, fails because he reinstates the one, and then where can you get novelty? So what Deleuze says, or what Badiou says, is that there needs to be a literal void where it's multiplicity all the way down. However, for the void, that void is where novelty just arises from. It's kind of an interesting point. It's just kind of like we can't have anything that's like the foundation for novelty. It just needs to be a void itself. Kind of odd, but for Deleuze's point here, it's more so the opposite. Any kind of void almost appears, or it is, fully empty of folds. Whereas for Leibniz, it's all just folds, and folds are always full in of themselves, and that folding process is always making things anew. So when you take that sheet of paper and you fold it and make something, you fold it again and make something, it's always a new thing being made. Now, Badiou's point is that, it's the same sheet of paper. I think what Deleuze would be saying is, no. Every time that happens, the entire operation itself is changing due to the fact that it's using something it's never seen before. And this is, I think, how Deleuze escapes a lot of those critiques in general. When you look at maybe the virtual and the actual in difference and repetition, you could easily look at the virtual as this kind of more transcendent thing that's choosing what to actualize. But in reality, the virtual is just singularities, differential relations, intensities. This becomes actualized, and in that process, it's continuous. It takes the newfound actualized thing and continues building from that, essentially. It continues differentiating itself. So we shouldn't look at the floors as two levels in the sense that the upper is higher than the lower in the sense of like a transcendence. But we also shouldn't look at like the folding process itself existing outside as if there's a god playing with matter like a playground. Instead, it is all one process that cannot be separated. And I think that's hard to grasp. So for him, at least for me, it's hard to grasp. So for him, saying that Baroque Leibniz did not believe in the void would just be that kind of response to Badiou. One other thing I want to point out about this section, which is titled The Unfold, is that, and again, this is why people will critique Deleuze for being like a secret Neoplatonist, is that they're like, well, the unfold is just the opposite of the fold. If you fold something and then you unfold it, well, then you're still dealing with the same thing. For Deleuze, you're not. Because if you fold a piece of paper and unfold it, it now has a crease. So it's different. So when you look at this kind of painter, artist, Hantai here, he is folding over and over and over and over again these sheets of paper or whatever. And he is now creating new expressions of it that didn't exist previously, even if he's unfolding it. So it's really, really fascinating. I kind of want to get into that artist a little bit more. See, I'm trying to learn. Like, I know like Warhol. You know what I mean? I want to do a little bit more research. Okay, cool. And then let's move to 5, and I think we are done with this third chapter. 5, textures. Leibnizian physics includes two principal textures. Leibnizian physics includes two principal chapters. The first concerns the active, or so-called derivative, which are related to matter. The second concerns passive forces, or the resistance of the material, the texture. Which is citing for texture, see the letter to de Bosses, August 1715. Leibniz's physics attests to a constant interest in the problems of the resistance of materials. Okay, interesting. It is perhaps at the limit that texture best appears just before its rupture or tearing, when stretching is no longer opposed to the fold, but expresses it in a pure state, following a Baroque figure indicated by Bernard Cash, hysteresis more than stretching. Here again, the fold repels the slits or the hole. They do not belong to the same pictorial vision. As a general rule, it is the way a material is folded that constitutes its texture. It is defined less by its heterogeneous and really distinct parts than by the manner in which they become inseparable, by virtue of particular folds. Whence the concept of mannerism in its operative relation with the Baroque. Okay, it just didn't feel like a full sentence. Once the concept of mannerism, in its operative relation with the Baroque, this is what Leibniz meant when he invoked the paper or the tunic. Everything folds in its own manner, the rope and the stick, but also colors which are distributed according to the concavity and convexity of the rays of light, and sounds whose pitches are higher inasmuch as the trembling parts are shorter and tighter. Hence, texture depends not on the parts themselves, but on the strata that determine their cohesion. The new status of the objectile, is inseparable from different strata that dilate themselves, like so many occasions for detours and folds. In relation to the folds it is capable of producing, matter becomes a matter of expression. In this regard, the fold of matter or texture must be related to several factors, above all, in relation to... What? I thought this was the last... Okay, we're almost done. In relation to... chiaroscuro, I feel like I'm mispronouncing this. The way the fold catches the light in itself varies depending on the hour and the light of day, the contemporaneous researchers of Tromare and Nicole Greno, but also in relation to depth, how the fold itself determines a shallow depth, a superimposable depth. The fold of a sheet of paper defines a minimum of depth at our scale, as can be seen in the Baroque trompe-l'oeil letter holders, where it is the representation of a corneal, dog-eared or pleated, card that casts a depth in the side of a wall. Likewise, the depth of fabrics often superimposed, which has always inspired painting and which Elga Heinzen has today brought to a new power when the representation of striped and folded fabrics covers the entire painting, the body having become absent in the rises and falls, the ways and suns, which follow a line that in this case comes from Islam, or again the theater of matters insofar as a matter grasped, Hardened in its stretching or its hysteresis, can become capable of expressing in itself the folds of another matter, as in the wooden sculptures of Christian Renanciat, when the cedar of Lebanon becomes a plastic drop cloth, or the Parana pine becomes cotton and feathers. Finally, the way all these textures of matter tend toward a more elevated point, a spiritual point that envelops the form, that holds it enveloped, and that alone contains the secret of the material folds below. Where would these flow from, since they are not explained by their component parts, and since the swarming, the perpetual displacement of the contour outline comes from the projection of something spiritual into matter, a phantasmagoria of the order of thought, as Dupuy says? In another manner, the sculptor Georges Jean-Clos finds a somewhat analogous path when he goes from physical leaves of cabbage, infinitely folded, knotted, bloodied, or from infinitely stretched sheets to metaphysical peas, spiritual crabs, or heads of monads that give full sense to the expression, the folds of sleep. And that site is Jean-Claude Moss Sculptures at Dessines. Whether active or passive, the derivative forces of matter refer to primitive forces, which are those of the soul. Always the two floors and their harmony, their harmonization. This one to me was the most difficult paragraph today. I'm kind of struggling understanding it. Let me see here. Well, let's take a look maybe at the figures. Figure 14, Elga Heinzen. Looks like the outline of a body, right? Like in almost like in under sheets or in cloth right there. Yeah, linen cloth. Figure 15, Christian Renanciat. Beautiful. Cloth. Okay, so what is this saying? It says here, this is textures. So Deleuze is really focused here on textures. And it's clear that he's kind of even still trying to challenge the kind of Cartesian view of matter. I kind of am reading that as making the most amount of sense here. But then he's getting a bit weird with how he's viewing harmony. I'm kind of struggling to see how he's relating harmony here. Look, this is the second to last paragraph of the chapter. I have a feeling, given what we saw from the end of chapter 1 and the end of chapter 2, I have a feeling the end of chapter 3 here will slowly also bring us into the fourth chapter. So maybe it'll be more clear there. But notice he's really talking a lot about matter here. Matter becomes a matter of expression. So notice matter is not that thing out there that is affected. There is not the soul that affects the matter or a God that wields it. It is instead something always being expressed. And when we look at expression, what is a monad doing? It expresses the entire world from its own perspective. So we're noticing at both levels there is perspective. There is a perspective of the expression, how it's expressing itself, and that tie between the two. I still feel though, why and again, maybe I'm trying to ask too many questions to Deleuze here, but I do feel like, why not just the bottom floor? Why was that not possible? Now, Deleuze just might take the route, like I said earlier, that he might just say, well, that's just the way it is. That's the way reality is structured. Trying to ask that is like trying to ask what's north of the North Pole. It's just kind of a question that, we should problematize. But again, do we buy his argument that there needs to be this kind of monad? Why does it need to exist? And what does it do for matter if matter is already expressing itself? So it's kind of something that I'm thinking through. If we look at figure 15, we see more cloth. Looks like there's two figure 15s actually. Maybe figure 16 then? It kind of just looks like clay to me. Just like a clay. But it also looks like a fabric too. Which in a way is probably what Deleuze is getting at, where it's something almost, it looks like stretchy, it looks a bit fluid. But simultaneously, it looks like it could also just be a bit tough too, like a tough fabric. a satchel kind of bag. Okay. He does mention the fold of a sheet of paper here. I'm curious as to what he's doing with it. He says the fold of a sheet of paper defines a minimum of depth at our scale. So is he just trying to say that like the minimum way that we can understand the process of folding is just through a piece of paper? But then he's also saying likewise, so akin to a sheet of paper, let's take a look at fabric. Fabric. When he's saying it's superimposed, we fold a piece of fabric in half. Whichever side you look at, it's going to cover the other side. So even though it looks like one, right, from one perspective, it looks like it's flat. And it is flat. I mean, fabric, you can flatten it. It's actually superimposed. There's a depth there. A sheet of paper, it seems like you can't really cut that sheet of paper in half, right? It seems like almost like that's the minimum. But matter can always be divided. It's infinitely continuous. So something's happening here. I think that's what he's trying to get at. Something's happening here with how we view it and our perspective of it. And maybe realities, I mean, that's what he's saying, realities. It's just like that sheet of paper. It's just like that fabric. Yeah, and interesting. The fold of a sheet of paper defines the depth. Yeah, so it's the same kind of thing. You can fold it and it feels like there's depth there, but even with a sheet of paper itself, there's also even more depth because you can cut it in half. You can cut it in half horizontally in the sense that you're not like cutting a piece of paper with scissors like how you normally would, but you can literally make it 2 entire sheets of paper because it's superimposed. Let's see here. Anything else about this harmony stuff? I just feel like this harmony stuff comes a little fast. Whether active or passive, the derivative forces of matter refer to primitive forces, which are those of the soul. So when he says active and passive matter, I'm assuming he means maybe like, who said that? I think it was Rise last week or the week before, where they were talking about this kind of concept of the active and the passive. I believe it was that. How maybe the passive is, maybe it's lacking some of that kind of maybe force in a way. Does this have to do with intention here? Active and passive, might that be like organic versus inorganic matter? Something along those lines. But then it says that those forces refer to primitive forces, which are those of the soul. So what's happening now? Now he's trying to say that the forces come from a primitive force, which is the soul, but isn't the soul the monad, and the monad only belongs to the top floor? What's happening here? I mean, it must mean that those two floors are distinct, but they're not fully separate. So it's almost like our reality itself is folded via matter and a perception, and matter and a perception, matter and a perception almost. And I think once we get away from viewing the subject as the way that we do, we can kind of try and look at it maybe from the perspective when he says that you can cut an ant into 1 trillion pieces and you're still not going to find that like ant soul monad. Are there not other monads that are pertain to perspectives of the cut up parts of the ant though? That they have a point of view from that perspective of the world? Not as necessarily foundational for matter, but just something that's overlapping with it. So there's a perspective of the entire world from every single point of view. Can be found everywhere. I'm not sure. We can also look here. I just feel like, hold on. Okay, and that's the last one now. Okay, sorry. But let's look really quickly here. It's the same figure here. Gaetan de Clerambault. It's like covering the head with a cloth here. So maybe Deleuze is also, maybe that has to be the reference, maybe. Really quick. Where does he say Clerambault? I don't remember reading that, so sorry. I'm just kind of double checking the researcher in me. I can't really find that right now, so we can always come back. But I'm just curious if because this is a translation, right? I'm curious if someone just threw this in here. I doubt it. I'm sure it says Clarenbos somewhere in here. Actually, what I can do is I can just do this. There it is. Oh, number 6. Okay. So it looks like that previous one here comes from 6. And it says Clarenbo for folds coming from Islam. So Deleuze is also looking at, it's not just like Christian and the Baroque or even things that we find in the Renaissance or wherever that we find folds. It's from kind of everywhere. Okay, let's look at the last paragraph, and thank you all for sticking with me. Yeah, thanks, Rumpel. I appreciate it, and this is great. Thank you for coming. I'm just going to finish this last paragraph, though. I like your opening question to yourself. Yeah, sorry. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. I mean, this is hard. This is a tough read, and if it gets I mean, it's probably annoying for some people, but yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rumpel. And let's get this last one in, Patina. Thanks so much for saying. Okay, let's do it. 6, the paradigm. The search for a model of the fold indeed passes through the choice of a material. Is it the fold of a paper, as the Orient suggests, or the fold of a cloth, which seems to dominate the Occident? But the whole problem is that component materials of the fold, the texture, must not conceal the formal element or the form of expression. In this respect, the Greek fold is unsatisfactory, even though it has the justifiable ambition to be valid in the highest domains: political power, the power of thought. The Platonic paradigm of weaving as interlacing remains at the level of textures and does not extract the formal elements of the fold. This is because the Greek fold, as can be seen in the Politics and the Timaeus, presupposes a common measure between two terms that are mixed together, and thus it operates through circular movements that correspond to a repetition of the proportion. This is why in Plato the forms are folded, but we do not attain the formal element of the fold. The latter can only appear with the infinite and the incommensurable and the excessive when the variable curve has dethroned the circle. Footnote C. De la Liberté for the presence or absence of a common measure. Such is the case for the Baroque fold, with its corresponding status of a power of thought and a political power. The paradigm becomes mannerist and proceeds to a formal deduction of the fold. In this sense, the taste of the psychiatrist Clarenbo, which is where it came from Anti-Oedipus 1.4, for folds coming from Islam, and his extraordinary photographs of veiled women. Veritable paintings close to those of Helga Heinzen today do not testify to a simple private perversion, despite what has been said, any more than does Mallarmé's shawl and its desire to edit a fashion magazine. If there is a delirium in Clarenbo, it is by following the folds that he finds in the minute hallucinatory perceptions of other addicts. It is thus a characteristic of the formal deduction to straddle the most diverse materials and domains. In them, it will distinguish folds, both simple and composite, the hems or stitches, knots and seams being dependent on the fold, and drapes with their point of support. Citing Papetti, Valliere, Fromenil, and Tisserton, a book on Clarenbo, or text on Clarenbo, with its photographic reproductions and 2 lectures on drapery, a reader might be led to believe that these photos of overabundant folds refer to pages chosen by Clarenbo himself. But the postcards at the time of the colonial empire also reveal these systems of folds, which dictate all the clothing of Moroccan women, including that of the face and Islamic Baroque. Only then do we reach the material textures, and finally the agglomerates or conglomerates felt by the folding and not by weaving. We will see at what point this deduction is properly Baroque or Leibnizian. Yes, of other addicts. Yeah, I know. I noticed that. What does that? What does this mean? Sorry, I noticed when I read it. It was other. Oh, other addicts in organic chemistry. Jesse, what are you talking about? Let's see. The reference to Clarenbo, like I saw the Clarenbo, that's why I saw that reference, right, Patina, like when we were looking at this photo, and I was like, wait, I don't remember reading Clarenbo, because that's the psychiatrist that they reference in Anti-Oedipus, in their history of kind of the schizophrenia section. And I didn't know that Clarenbo like was taking photos and was interested in the different kind of maybe Islamic culture and maybe their, in their mental states, I guess, as he was, doing his research, for lack of a better term. The paradigm here. So this seems like the kind of culmination of the chapter where he's like kind of showing like he's kind of taking a dig big time into the kind of ancient Greek thought, the kind of classical Western philosophical tradition. He's showing that the Platonic paradigm of weaving, maybe its focus on interlacing, is focusing on kind of texture. Maybe it's still at the level of almost this completed object almost, rather than a process of folding. So there's clearly he's making a difference between weaving here. Patina writes, the Platonic paradigm of weaving is very interesting. Mostly because of weaving, history links with the history of computers. Something about interlacing, maybe? I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. But I do kind of appreciate how he's digging at Plato here. I think it's actually really smart. Him kind of talking that, about how the forms are folded, but it's not the formal element of the fold. And this almost reminds me of the paralogisms in the anti-Oedipus book, because they're not saying that something's beyond desire. They're not saying something is beyond the process of desiring production. Even if that process misuses itself, it's still part of that process. So it's kind of fascinating. He's saying that even Plato's folds, the forms, that's still folded. I mean, that's Plato's thoughts. I mean, you can't divorce that from the process of folding, but the forms themselves are not necessarily accurate at all for trying to display a metaphysical foundation. And I will throw in a picture of what you just posted, the Jacquard loom, right there. And yeah, it's really interesting. So you're saying, so it's like an interlacing kind of machine almost, like a weaving kind of being necessary for that machine. Yeah, really cool. Really interesting. And then we can kind of end here. We see there's this critique of Plato. And then we can kind of end here. He kind of does talk about Clérambault, which is interesting. He also mentioned the word schizophrenic here without really explaining how he views schizophrenia. He's also mentioned Clérambault, so I wonder if he kind of is also drawing from, earlier anti-Oedipus, work with Guattari, and how he's viewing, folds here. I mean, he's also talking about delirium and hallucination here. So there's kind of a lot happening with maybe how we view matter and texture. And, it's also making me think about people who have, he's talking about addicts here. I'm not really sure, but it's making me think of how people, maybe if they are on a substance, they feel different about texture. So maybe it's kind of making me think a little bit about that, or maybe how some people are more sensitive to texture too. I'm also thinking that even when you're eating, sometimes people have a texture aversion to certain foods. So I don't know. I'm thinking a lot about how he's dealing with texture here, but it sounds like he's really trying to make the point in that if it's not folded, then if it's not passing through the choice of a material, then maybe that's not the process of the fold. So that's kind of perfect timing. That's all I have for today. And then next week, we will begin part 2 of the book. Whoop, whoop, whoop. So we kind of have the foundation now of matter and the soul and their relationship and that process of folding and how they're interdependent on each other and inseparable from each other. So next week, just looking at the title of the chapter, Sufficient Reason, now I think we're going to get into how can Deleuze get rid of Leibniz's transcendent God how can Deleuze get up and say, that asking the question of how can he get up and say that asking a question of I don't know, why this world instead of another world is maybe not legitimate under his framework. So I'm super excited to dig into it, and thanks for coming, even though it started late. So I appreciate it, and I'm gonna head out myself.